Hi, good morning, everybody. We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, as the case may be. Chodesh Tov. I wish you, if you're watching this live, I wish you a very significant and meaningful and deep Chodesh Elul, the new month of Elul. I'd like to thank webyeshiva.org for being the host for this platform that we are studying Moreh Nevukhim on, the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed. And as you can see from the screen, today's shiur is dedicated by Rivka Malka Khan in loving memory of her brother Michael Kalman ben Tzvi Mordechai. May his neshama have an aliyah. And today, what we're going to be covering are the last two of the 12 premises of the Mutakalimun, which we'll just review, that the Rambam has been discussing in chapter 73 of the first section of the guide, in the first section of Moreh Nevukhim. We are, if we're looking at the Pines edition of the English translation of the Moreh Nevukhim, we are on page 212. And so I'm going to share my screen with you to show you, just to quickly review the first 10 premises of the Mutakalimun. Now, just to get our bearings once again, the Rambam feels that it's necessary to present the opposing view as to what we utilize logically in order to prove the big questions about creation and about God, about existence and about the maker of that existence. And the Rambam uses Aristotelian philosophy, which he acknowledges is fraught with certain challenges. But at the same time, he feels that it is the superior and correct method of seeking truth and filtering and processing reality as we know it. There is another school of philosophers that the Rambam has grouped together as the Midabrim, the speakers, or in Arabic it's called Mutakalimun. And as the Rambam had revealed to us a couple of chapters ago, this type of philosophy spans multiple religions. It spans Islam, Christianity, and even Judaism. That there are many Kalamic thinkers within the Jewish world as well. And the Rambam is therefore not only involved in a disputation with people of a different faith, but he's also involved in a disputation with members of his own faith. And he provides a very significant amount of time in order to carefully and methodically go through the premises that these mutakalimin are working with. And he demonstrates how none of these premises are acceptable to him using Aristotelian philosophy. So just to review, we've gone over the first 10, and today we're going to be completing 11 and 12 to complete this chapter. Number one, atoms exist and make up everything, and that's a very important premise that according to these Midabrim, the world is comprised of small, tiny little particles that are undetectable to the naked eye, but that when grouped together make up all that exists. Number two, vacuums exist and are the stuff between these atoms. Number three, time is atomic. Every moment is now. It is not that there is any continuity between what happened a moment ago and right now. Everything is occurring in units of and packets of time that are constantly being recreated. Number four, every substance must possess accidents or incidental attributes that are attached to that which is the basic stuff, the basic material of existence. And ergo, number five, these accidents reside in the atoms. So the redness of the sweater is attached to each and every atom that makes up the sweater. Number 6, each accident exists only for an instant, because just as all of creation is fleeting, it only exists for the now of this moment, and then there's a new creation that is created. The same thing, all right, is true about each and every accident of each and every atom. And as we said, the Mutakalimun take the term Hamechadesh betubo b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reshit quite literally, that God is constantly creating and recreating every single thing that exists, including the person that you're listening to right now. Number 7, just as positive attributes are created accidents, so are privations of attributes created constantly. If you recall, what we discussed last week is that just like a quality of a living being is that it is alive, so too the quality of a dead being is that it is dead, and God is constantly imbuing deadness as an attribute, as an accidental attribute to the atoms of that being that is currently dead. There's no such thing as a privation of an attribute, but rather everything is a positive attribute. Number 8, the atoms throughout the universe are all the same. All differences in substance are not innate, but are rather due to different accidents that are attached to those atoms. Number 9, no accident is dependent upon another, but each accident occurs independently. So if a particular substance has multiple attributes or multiple accidents, it's not that one is causative of the other, but they are all being created by God simultaneously and independently of each other. And finally, the big one is that anything imaginable is possible, because the Mutakalimun invested a tremendous amount in the faculty called imagination. And if I can imagine it, it potentially can exist. And the Rambam categorically had rejected that, with the argument that there are many things that are imaginable that science or logic, the intellect, I guess you could say, has proven cannot logically exist. And there are many things that the intellect has proven that can exist, but the imagination has difficulty thinking about this visually, which is, for example, the example that he gave is that we know that the world is round, and we know that when two people stand on opposite sides of the planet, they're both standing upright. And yet logic would dictate that one of them should be on top and one of them should be on the bottom. One of them should be right side up and the other one should be upside down. So our imagination has difficulty getting our heads around the concept of gravity of a huge body like the planet. And yet we know logic and science have proven that this exists. So therefore, the Rambam says that we have to decouple the intellect from the faculty of imagination, and we spent a little bit of time discussing that idea. We're going to come back to that when we learn the final premise, the final of the 12 premises. But let's first talk about infinity. And one of the issues that the Mutakalimun felt was an important discussion was the concept of infinity. And as the Rambam writes, and just read from page 212, the 11th premise is, this is their saying, that the existence of that which is infinite in any mode whatever is impossible. The explanation of this is as follows. And he's going to go in explaining why it is impossible for anything that has the attribute of infinity to exist, according to the Mutakalimun. And then the Rambam, I'm going to go through most of this outside. The Rambam points out that there are 4 types of philosophical infinity. When we talk about infinity, there are really 4 different categories of infinite things. There's number 1, and I hope you can see this on your screen, the infinite size or mass of a physical body. That, the Rambam acknowledges, has been philosophically proven even by Aristotle's philosophy, that you cannot have a physical body that is infinite in size. Anything that is physical, part of our physical realm, must be confined to some finite space and mass. There's a second type of infinity, which is you can have something that is finite in size, like a bottle, but you cannot have an infinite number of bottles. That has also been proved, that quantity of things existing simultaneously on an infinite scale is also impossible. So that's the second type of infinity that the Mutakalimun say is impossible, and we would check off on our checklist and say, Mutakalimun, you are right on. That is exactly, we agree to that. That's been scientifically proven. Now, the third and fourth types of infinity are the types of infinity which are the source of the controversy that and the disputation that the Rambam is engaging with in the Mutakalimun. First of all, what about an infinite number of divisions within a body or within time? Can I break down, if I have a metal bar, can I break down that metal bar into infinite points? Or let's say I look at a road that I'm about to walk upon. Are there an infinite number of points along that road, or are there a finite number of points along that road? Now, we know that mathematically, you can suggest that there are an infinite number of points along that road because there is no amount of distance that cannot be halved and then can be halved again. So anything can potentially have an infinite number of points. Any finite stretch of space, whether it's two-dimensional or three-dimensional, can have an infinite number of points in it. But the Mutakalimun argue that based on the impossibility of infinitude in the first two, infinity as a concept is impossible. And this is where the Rambam disagrees. And he says that there are an infinite potential number of divisions within a body or a time, and that has never been disproven. Now, there is a point that he makes where he says that it is possible in potentia, and the Rambam, or in potential, and the Rambam emphasizes that point, or it seems that he's emphasizing that point, and I just wanted to explain why. Now, this may be a finer philosophical point, but I just felt that because we're just working on the last two topics today, we have a little bit more time to really focus our attention on some of the finer philosophical points. And for this, I just wanted to present you with a concept called Xenos Paradox. Zeno is an ancient Greek philosopher, and he had presented certain paradoxes in his writings that when you think about certain concepts, you're immediately met with a paradox. And Zeno presented this paradox as follows. Achilles, whom we can assume is the fastest runner of antiquity. By the way, let me just point out that if you would like to see these handouts or download them for yourself, you have two ways of doing that. One is that you can go to Facebook, go to the Facebook group called Shiur in Moreh Nevukhim. You can join that group. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can just download the PDF from there. The other is to go to the webyeshiva.org platform, which is also perfectly free, and you can join the course in Moreh Nevukhim, and each course description has downloadable PDFs that you can use to, if you wanted to keep this as a record. So Achilles, whom we can assume is the fastest runner of antiquity, is racing to catch the tortoise that is slowly crawling away from him. Both are moving along a linear path at constant speeds, right? This classic tortoise and the hare, but here it's tortoise and Achilles. In order to catch the tortoise, Achilles will have to reach the place where the tortoise presently is. However, by the time Achilles gets there, the tortoise will have crawled to a new location. Now, this is the argument that Zeno makes, working under the premise that every single expanse, every single stretch of road has an infinite number of points, then the tortoise will always have reached one infinite point before Achilles has. And Achilles will never be able to traverse an infinite number of points. So Achilles, therefore, will never, because when something is infinite, it means that you can never traverse it because it's infinite. So if there are an infinite number of points between the tortoise and Achilles, how will Achilles ever catch up to the tortoise? He's got to traverse infinity, and no one can possibly traverse an infinite number of points. So again, that's the argument. So Aristotle has several criticisms of Zeno, but the one that is important for us to note here, which is what the Rambam is addressing, is the third argument. Aristotle's third and most influential critical idea involves a complaint about potential infinity. On this point, in remarking about the Achilles paradox, Aristotle said, Zeno's argument makes a false assumption in asserting that it is impossible for a thing to pass over infinite things in a finite time. Aristotle believed it is impossible for a thing to pass over an actually infinite number of things in a finite time, but he believed that it is possible for a thing to pass over a potentially infinite number of things in a finite time. It's a very subtle point, but that's why the Rambam says mathematically you can imagine and you can logically conclude that there are an infinite number of points over an expanse or stretch of a road, but that it should be impossible to traverse potentially infinite points which don't really exist in the real world is something that is not something that we are suggesting. It's only impossible to traverse actual infinity, but it is not impossible to traverse potential infinity. I just wanted to bring that point out. Now let's go to the fourth type of infinity that also is the point of contention between the Mutakalimun and the Rambam. Number four is infinite sequence of causal things or moments where A begets B, B begets C ad infinitum. And here we talk about causality once again, and we also talk about sequential infinity. And here's really where the Rambam makes a very strong point of division. I will grant you that it is impossible for bodies, an infinite number of bodies, to exist concomitantly or in one place in one time. But it is not impossible for infinity to exist sequentially, which means that I had one moment which leads to another moment, or I have one thing, one person, which gives birth to another generation of people, and that generation gives birth to another generation, or that moment gives rise to another moment. Whether it's conceptually, whether it's physically, it doesn't matter. But the Rambam says that logically, infinity can exist in time sequentially. Even though infinity cannot exist in any given moment, concomitantly, infinity can exist as a concept sequentially. You can have sequential infinity, but you cannot have concurrent or concomitant infinity. And that's the point of disagreement that he has with the Mutakalimun. Now, why is these last two types of infinity, the ability to divide something up into an infinite number of points and also sequential infinity? These are two things that the Mutakalimun say that just like the first two types of infinity are impossible, so too these last two types of infinity are impossible. The Rambam says, I completely disagree, especially on that last point that you suggest that sequential infinity is impossible. Now, where is this going? This is a very important point for the Rambam and for the Mutakalimun, because the Mutakalimun use this argument to prove that there must have been one point of creation. There must have been a start point to all of existence. Since infinity sequentially is impossible, it is impossible to suggest that the world has existed for an infinite amount of time. Ergo, the world must have been created at some finite point of time, and there must have been that sequence that started from point zero and leads us to today. The Rambam says that is not logically provable. And the stakes are the Mutakalimun use this argument religiously to prove that there must have been an act of creation, which will lead to our whole theological discussion that we need to prove. One of the four things that we need to demonstrate is that there was indeed a creation that took place, which leads to our belief in a creator and other things about God. But the Rambam says, I believe in creation, but not because of the argument that infinity is impossible. Because sequential infinity is indeed possible, but that's not and despite the fact that sequential infinity is possible, I still agree that the world was created at one point in time. And that's something that he's going to discuss in the second section of Moreh Nevukhim. But this is the point of his argument, and that's why he makes such a strong point of making it, is that while we may end up with the same belief that the world was created, at one point, but your reason for arguing it is from a philosophical argumentation that infinity sequentially is impossible. I disagree, says the Rambam. Sequential infinity is impossible. Aristotelian science has proven that, but nonetheless, I still believe that the world was created at some point in time. Okay, So that's the 11th premise. And now we're going to go to the 12th premise. And this is also a very important idea, which the Rambam says, don't be so dismissive of it. The Mutakalimun spent a lot of time because it is essential for what they are going to put forward in all of their theories. And that is this, it's a very simple statement. The senses do not reliably gauge reality. And that's why one of the titles of our discussion today are the senses reliable arbiters of reality. And for the Rambam, the answer is absolutely yes. And for the Mutakalimun, the answer is absolutely no. And the Mutakalimun are suspicious of the senses for two reasons, as the Rambam details on page 213. He says that reason number one is either the real object in question is too small to detect, for example, atoms. We put forward that we believe in the existence of atoms that make up everything that exists in this world. Now, the first question that the Rambam will ask them is, show me the atoms. Where are the atoms? Where are these tiny little particles that you say exist that no one can see, that make up all of reality? To that, the Mutakalimun say that there are certain things that the senses cannot detect because they are too small. Or they will say that something may be very, very large, but it is too far away from us spatially for us to detect. And that is why that we cannot accurately gauge the motion of the heavens. The Rambam categorically rejects both of these premises and says that we were given our senses and created with our senses by God for the very purpose of detecting reality. And if we cannot detect something, then it's basically God mandated, because he's the one who made us, that they don't exist. And therefore, if I cannot see something, at least, very, very small, tiny particles that have never been measured or gauged, so then they don't exist. If I cannot detect the motion of the heavens, so then the motion of the heavens that I am told is what's happening is not accurate. And it is based there. It was on that basis that the Rambam subscribed wholly to the Ptolemaic planetary system, where science had demonstrated that the world is made of concentric spheres that are transparent and that have the stars and all the other celestial bodies embedded within them. The Rambam felt that this was absolutely scientifically proven and correct, because that is what we perceive with our senses. So the first argument that the Mutakalimun say is that the senses are faulty because they are limited based on distance and the size of the thing that is being studied in order to be able to detect if it's real. Argument number two is that our senses can sometimes be faulty, either because one's sense of sight or smell may be off due to illness or another medical condition. For example, someone with the condition of jaundice sees everything as yellow because they have yellow in their eye. So does that mean that everything is indeed yellow? I mean, modern science tells us that no two people see color in the exact same way. This is the argument of the Mutakalimun. Just because you see something in a certain way doesn't mean that it's truly representative of that. So that's the first argument, or because the object in question is obstructed or distorted by its environment. So there are many optical illusions that exist in the real world, like a mirage in the desert. Or the example that the Rambam brings is that there's refraction that is created by water. So let's say if I were to take a crooked bar of metal and I were to stick it in the water at exactly the right angle so that the water in its refractive qualities bends the image of the bar to the point where now the bar looks like it's perfectly straight, when in reality, when I take it out of the water, it's actually crooked. So you see that there are optical illusions and there are other sensory illusions, even beyond optical. There can be auditory illusions as well, where I think I hear something and I really don't. So the point that and certainly when it comes to spatial reality, things that are very far away look very small, right? Like it says in your rear view mirror, things that are in your rear view mirror may appear smaller than they really are, right? That old label on our cars, right? That's essentially what the Rambam is saying, is that there are so many tricks that environment plays on the way that we perceive things, and therefore you cannot rely on your senses as a reliable arbiter of reality. Now, why is that such an important point for the Mutakalimun? And the Rambam writes on page 214, he says, in fact, all their assertions that we have set forth in the foregoing passage are necessary. And if even one premise were to be destroyed, the whole purpose would be destroyed. The Rambam wants to point out that all 12 of these premises are necessary for the Mutakalimun to come to the conclusions that they come to. Indeed, he says this last of the premises is most necessary, for whenever we apprehend with our senses things controverting their assumptions, they are able to say, no attention should be paid to the senses, as the matter which, as they think, has been proven by the testimony of the intellect is demonstrated. In other words, the Mutakalimun do not believe in inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning basically says things that you perceive with your senses are brought into your mind, and then you use your mind to start thinking or processing what you've just sensed. And that's the whole basis of Aristotelian thought, Aristotelian science. Observe, detect, experience with your sensory perception what is the world like, and then come to conclusions based on what you've sensed. And the Mutakalimun basically say that there are certain things that are a priori in our knowledge that are independent of what we perceive from our senses, that are really the more important arbiter of truth. And even if your senses tell you otherwise, but if your intellect tells you that, or your religious faith tells you that something else is the reality, you have to push aside what your senses tell you, and you have to go with what your intellect or your tradition tells you as the primary truth. Now, this is a huge battle, and it really can be stretched into so many different directions. But I wanted to point out a couple of things. Number one, if we were to sort of, first of all, we have to acknowledge that the Rambam's commitment to Aristotelian science and the way that Aristotle was able to arrive at the ultimate truths of reality is also not something that many of the Rambam's own religious contemporaries and thinkers subscribe to. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, for example, did not subscribe to this idea that the Rambam says that your senses are the final arbiter of truth. In a sense, the Rambam might accuse Rabbi Yehuda Halevi of being more of a Kalamist in this respect, as he did Rabbi Saadia Gaon, in that both a number of sages have argued that our senses are not the final arbiter of truth, and our senses can deceive us in many different ways. I wanted to present to you why the Rambam felt so strongly about this, because part of Aristotle's writings say that when an idea that we perceive enters into our mind, it's not just photons bouncing off our eye receptors, but something much deeper is going on. And I just found a short piece contrasting Aristotle with a more contemporary or more modern philosopher, Thomas Hobbes of the 17th century, to sort of give you an illustration of this. This is from an article in the Atlantic. Aristotle, like Hobbes, and this is Hobbes writing in his classic Leviathan. He says, Aristotle, like Hobbes, did think that knowledge came from the senses, but he had a very different view of how senses worked. Aristotle believed that every physical object has a form or essence and a substance. Remember, we talked about this form and matter that of Aristotle. So a clay model of a tree and a real tree share commonalities of form, which is the non-physical aspect of that tree, although their substances are totally different. Aristotle also thought that the psyche is an instrument whereby we can receive the form of objects without the substance, form and matter, right? He compares sensation to a signet ring making an impression of wax. So when I see something, when I see a tree, the form of that tree enters into my mind, and my mind now becomes sort of the owner or the holder of the form of that tree, and it's now collected in my mind. Very different from the way that we think about knowledge in general. Hobbes, however, did not really believe that the concept of essence is useful in explaining the world, or what we would call form. He is basically a materialist. He believes that the only things worth talking about are matter and its interactions. Therefore, his account of how we obtain knowledge through the senses has to rely on interaction between matter. This might sound like an obscure difference, but it has a lot of consequences for how one studies the world. If you agree with Aristotle, the implication is that by observing the world, you can get an idea of the real essence of things. Acquiring theoretical knowledge is then a matter of thinking rationally about the implications of this knowledge. Like I mentioned before, inductive reasoning. I have captured in my mind the form of all that I have perceived. And now I just need to process those forms in my intellect and come up with a conclusion about what reality is. Thus, physical science is a matter of everyday observation followed by rigorous thinking. However, if the information you get from the senses is just a bunch of particles bouncing off of your sensory organs, as Hobbes believes, then there's good reason to be worried that the senses are unreliable and you need to spend time carefully tweaking the information you get from the senses to make sure you have it right. This gives rise to an experimental model, which Hobbes' contemporary Francis Bacon focused on far more than Hobbes did. The whole idea of the experimental, the scientific theory, scientific method, this all starts in the 17th century. As far as for how commonplace it was, Aristotelianism was basically the dominant philosophy from the time of Thomas Aquinas, and really even before Aquinas, up until the 1600s. And that's why the Rambam is an Aristotelian. Hobbes is writing around the time of transition away from Aristotle's position as the preeminent thinker on matters such as this. And therefore, just going back, we go back to these 12 premises. A lot of times people will, might ask, okay, so how does the Rambam score? If we were going to have, the kids game Mortal Kombat, player one is the Mutakalimun, player two is the Maimonidean or the Aristotelian, and they're involved in a tournament. Who wins each round of these premises? Well, the atomic theory of the Mutakalimun is very appealing to us today scientifically. We've proven the existence of molecules, atoms, things that exist on a subatomic level, and certainly the very last point, that the senses are not the final arbiter of reality, is certainly true, because we have a completely different way of understanding how the mind interacts through our senses with the outside world from that of Aristotle. The idea of vacuums existing and that time is atomic is also, well, the idea of time being atomic is perhaps something where the Rambam might have won that tournament. The idea that everything is fluid and nature flows from one moment to the other, and that there is causality in the world, that's something perhaps that the Rambam would win. But I would encourage you to go through this list and really try to critically look at where the Rambam perhaps got it right in comparison to where we are today, and where the Rambam science and philosophical view of reality is off based upon not only where we are today in the world of science, but where most of our Jewish thought would place us today. And I think you'll discover that it's a very, very mixed bag. There is no one today that can say that they are completely a philosophical Maimonidean or Aristotelian. It just doesn't fit in our world of thinking today, neither from a scientific standpoint nor from a Judaic standpoint as well. But the Rambam is now concluding this chapter, and he says, after having prefaced these premises, I shall begin to make clear their methods with regard to the four above-mentioned problems. And just to review, those four problems that the Rambam is going to say that the Mutakalimun address, which is how we're going to finish the first section, are they're going to tackle proof that the world was created, proof that the world has a being who created it, meaning the existence of God. Number three, that God who is our creator is a unitary God, that he is completely unitary, completely one. And number four, that God who is our creator and responsible for everything is completely incorporeal, God's incorporeity. And so all of these four are going to be demonstrated using the Kalamist methodology, and the Rambam will show his criticisms of their proofs in order to be able to set up his way of proving these four things in the second section of Moreh Nevukhim. So this is where we're going to hold it today. And I just wanted to mention that next week we will not be having class. I will unfortunately not be available. So Be'ezrat Hashem, God willing, we will pick this up in 2 weeks. Anyway, let me wish you all a wonderful day and a wonderful week, and we'll see you, God willing, in 2 weeks from now. Take care.